situation.
The following measures are to be applied with immediate effect. 1. Closure of land and air borders between ECOWAS countries and Niger.
The country won't be able to withstand the sanctions. Economically, it's going to be a disaster. Socially, it's going to be a disaster.
We simply don't know yet what will happen in Niger, and we're preparing for the alternative options.
Niger's military coup leaders have arrested 4 more government ministers. That's according to the party of detained President Mohamed Bazoum. Now, those arrested include the ministers for oil and mining, as well as the head of the party's executive committee. The junta has accused Niger's former colonial power, France, of plotting a military intervention to reinstate President Bazoum, who's been held by coup leaders since last week. On Sunday, supporters of the coup stormed the French embassy in the capital, Niamey. The French government says it recognizes Bazoum as Niger's only legitimate leader.
In pursuit of its policy of finding ways and means to intervene militarily in Niger, France, with the complicity of certain Nigerians, held a meeting at the headquarters of the Niger National Guard to obtain the necessary political and military authorizations. Thus, Mr. Massoudou Hassoumi, acting as Prime Minister, signed the following documents. I, Massoudou Hassoumi, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, and Interim Prime Minister, authorize the French partner to carry out strikes within the presidential palace in order to free the President of the Republic of Niger, Mohamed Bazoum, who has been taken hostage.
Now, that's as West African nations announced travel and economic sanctions against Niger and threatened to use force if the coup leaders fail to reinstate President Bazoum within a week. The ECOWAS group of states suspended all commercial and financial transactions with Niger, as well as freezing assets. That is worrying news for many people in Niger.
I say to myself that the Nigerians are already going to have to tighten their belts. So now what's going to happen is that people are also imposing a blockade on us because they're closing their borders. In the case of Niger, it's true that these sanctions are very heavy, and I think we're really going to suffer economically. It's going to be a very difficult time for the country.
Let's bring in our correspondent, Amaka Okoye. She's monitoring developments in Niger from Lagos in neighboring Nigeria. We're coming up toward a week since this coup. Have the coup leaders now stabilized their grip on power?
I think that would be very ambitious to say at this point that they've been able to stabilize power, really. What we see, or what we can say we're seeing, is yes, there is some sort of strategic engagement, there's partnership, there is, the conversation in terms of mediation. We've seen, the president of Chad, Idris Deby, himself going there today and has spoken to Abdurrahman Chani, the now self-declared leader or ruler of Niger, and also met with, the deposed President Bazoum. Of course, it is too early in the day to say that they have already stabilized, the country, or they have a grip of power, so to say. They have a long way to go. Like you did, you heard from the reports there. It's really not a long walk. It's really going to be a long walk, rather, to freedom, because there still needs to be engagement, even to put together what do they want, how do they want to move the country forward. It is really too early to say that they have all figured it out, really.
In the meantime, we heard their residents who are expressing their concerns about looming sanctions hitting Niger. Can you give us a sense of the country's dependence on foreign aid and what this will mean for people?
I mean, Niger, as we do know, unfortunately, is one of the poorest countries of the world, not just the continent, but of the world. And, normally they receive $2 billion, of funds from, World Health, World Bank, rather, as developmental assistance. And then all of this suddenly being cut off, that's going to put them in a really dire situation. Apart from the finances that they get also, it's also, Niger is a security partner with US, with France as well. And being a security partner means that both France and the US, for instance, have both built their bases in Niger, from where they fight, Islamic insurgency. That means that they bring in, their technical know-how, they bring in manpower, they bring in expertise into the country. All of these now have stopped. And we know also that the EU significantly has increased their security assistance. These are all of the things that Niger will now have to grapple with. They have now to figure out how do they move forward. So indeed, the concerns of the people that we heard is really, really legit, because they have tougher days ahead, tougher years even ahead, depending on how long it gets them to get this right. So even when it makes sense when Abdurrahmane was, appealing to their technical partners and financial partners, this is indeed what he was referring to, because indeed they have a long way and they will be needing that support. How would they be able to do this all by themselves remains the crucial question.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us to break that down. That's DW's correspondent, Amaka Okoye.
Thanks for having me.
So as we've heard, the crisis in Niger is also on the agenda in Europe and here in Berlin. Germany says it has suspended financial aid and warns it could take further measures. Germany has about 100 troops stationed in Niger to help train local forces. Here's the German defense minister speaking today.
Those responsible for the coup say they will abide by all international arrangements and agreements. That remains to be seen. We're in contact with our counterparts in Niger through various channels. That means there are talks, there is contact.
So for some context on this, let's bring in Ulf Leising, the head of the Sahel program at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is associated with Germany's conservative opposition CDU. He's joining us today from the Malian capital, Bamako. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to start by asking you why Niger has been so important for Europe and for the West.
I mean, Niger is the most important security partner for the West. It's also, especially for Europe, extremely important because it closed the migrant route, the main migrant route from sub-Saharan Africa to Libya and the Mediterranean coast. So it's a very poor country, but it's strategic. It's the only security partner, and it's basically the stopgap for Europe to avoid more poverty-driven migration reaching Europe.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you more about that. As you've said, Niger's been an important transit point for people who are fleeing violence to try and make it to Europe. How do you think that the political instability in Niger is going to affect migration routes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the big question is now whether the new rulers, whoever that might be, will honor the previous agreement with the European Union to basically close the route from Agadez, a town in northern Niger, to Niger. That basically, really lowered migration levels since 2015. And that's not clear what's going to happen. And the other issue is then, if now the army is busy or officers busy playing politics, fighting for power in the capital, they will have less resources, actually battling jihadists. So there will be more instability, and probably then this will be exploited by human traffickers.
Okay, so security and migration top of minds in Europe. France will also presumably be concerned about its access to uranium, since we know Niger is a crucial supplier. Now the mining minister of the elected government has been arrested. Are mining activities continuing there?
According to my information, yes. I mean, everybody's now concerned a bit. The airport is closed, but otherwise it appears to be, business as usual for the time being. Of course, we don't know what position the next government will take concerning mining concessions.
Yeah, looking a little more broadly, what do you think Germany and other European states are going to do here? On the one hand, they need allies in the region for many of the reasons we've discussed, but do you think that they would work with a military junta?
I think they will have no choice. I mean, they're running really fast out of options. First, Mali went into the hand of the military, then Burkina Faso, Guinea, now Niger. I mean, if they become too difficult or refuse dealing with military governments, they might as well stay in Europe. So they will have no choice, because it will be crucial for Europeans to keep migration low through the routes to Niger. because that it's now the top subject in many European countries, and boosting right extremist parties. So now they're trying to get the putschists to step down. This probably won't work, but eventually I think they will come together and then also work again with Niger. Even in Mali, they were ready to continue working with the military government. They opted for Russia, but it was not the Europeans who ended the cooperation with Mali.
Yeah, speak to me more about that. Do you see in this case in Niger Russian involvement in any way, or to what degree do you think that this military junta is going to seek alliances there?
I'm a bit skeptical because Niger has traditionally had very strong relations with Western countries. France, there's not even a Russian embassy. We've seen a pickup in disinformation spread from, Russia-linked channels, so just to boost the putschists a bit. But I'm skeptical the new rulers will make a deal with Wagner, because Russia never does anything for free. They always want to get paid, and Niger doesn't have the resources to hire mercenaries. And I'm not so sure that Russia will try. They will talk about relationships and stuff, but I think in reality, not much is going to happen.
And we have seen footage of these large rallies of people who are supporting the coup leaders. Is it clear at this point how much public opinion, how much public support, rather, there is for the military junta here?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I'd make the case that many Nigerians still, are in favor of Bazoum, but now keep their heads down to avoid trouble. These protests which we've seen on the weekend, Russian flags, people shouting Putin, these are young people basically manipulated or, probably even partly paid for people just to, to stir up things a bit like you've seen in other countries. That's not a genuine, admiration for the putschists. On the other hand, also no army unit has come to the rescue of Bazoum. So it seems to me that the putschists are going to stay, and at least, they have support of the key players who really matter in Niger.
Now, you mentioned the role of disinformation here. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that has played out in this particular situation?
Yeah, I mean, you had these pro-Russia trolls who are just focusing first on Mali, getting the French army out and making MINUSMA, the UN operation, unpopular, then focusing Burkina. Now, most recently, they're very active in Niger just to frame Bazoum as an agent of France or the West, and that all this military cooperation with Western countries is failing, just to make him look in the eyes of his population as failure. And even now, while the coup was unfolding last week, there was a huge pickup, all sorts of claims that Bazoum already had resigned and stuff. So they're really trying now to make most of it, just, to mobilize opinion in Niger. On the ground, there's probably not much to it, but, many people in the Sahel, for lack of, credible media, believe what they read on WhatsApp groups.
Well, thank you so much for your insights and joining us here. That is Ulf Lessing from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation.
Yep.
For more on this, I'm very pleased to welcome Kabir Adamo, a security analyst focusing on the Sahel region and managing director at Beacon Consulting. So we've heard there, Germany becoming the latest country to suspend aid to Niger, which is one of the world's poorest countries and relies heavily on foreign support. Can you tell us what this will mean for people in Niger?
So Niger is an impoverished country. It depends significantly on foreign aid to meet its developmental aspirations. Now, whenever that aid is cut, it would have a direct impact on the ability of the government to meet the needs of its people. And because this government relies on support from the people, the possibility that that type of challenges would turn the people against the military junta is extremely high. So the military junta would be jittery, and of course it would be put under a lot of pressure the more the international community continues to cut this type of aid.
Yeah, the ousted prime minister has talked of a potential catastrophe. Would you agree that that is what it's facing in terms of being able to provide assistance to its people?
Definitely. He, more than anyone, understands the challenges that the Nigerian economy is going through. He also understands the pressure that such types of isolation, diplomatic isolation, would mean for Niger and its people. And so his statement is coming at a very right time. I think the challenge right now is what the other members of the international community, especially countries like Russia and to an extent China, will do. It would be in the interest of everyone if they do support the current effort by the international community to restore democratic governance.
Do you expect that they will? I'm also curious if you can speak a little bit about how much support there is for Russia within Niger and among the backers of this coup.
So let me start with your last question. Unfortunately, France's post-colonial policy has left a bitter spill, as it were, in most West African countries and several other African countries. And we've seen that sentiment rising in virtually all the former French colonies. And so some of what we saw after the coup on the 26th of July is an example of that sentiment in Niger. And the question Nigerians are asking themselves is the resources that we have, gold, uranium, petroleum, how come that those resources are not serving our interest? As you know, a significant portion of the uranium in Niger is going to France, as an example. There is French military presence in Niger, and yet the security challenge in Niger is still extremely high. So it's that kind of sentiment that is being pushed towards France, as it were. Now, to whether Russia and to an extent China will back this international effort, I strongly doubt, for the simple reason that the developments in Ukraine has isolated Russia. And Russia is using Africa as a channel to gain support within the international community. We've seen economic policies where, for instance, it's using supply of grain, supply of fertilizer, to an extent supply of energy, petroleum products, as an economic diplomacy tool. So it's not likely, except if there is a way to bring its interest in tandem with the international desire to restore democracy in Niger. And at the moment, I can't see that happening. So definitely the geopolitics, as it were, as we see it, is going to play a role in what happens in Niger in the coming days.
Yeah, perhaps we can take a closer look at potential diplomatic pressure from other corners. We know West African states have also agreed on a number of sanctions to try and pressure the military junta. Of course, France and the EU have suspended ties. Do you think that either of these will be an effective form of pressure on the coup leaders? So
there are a couple of other players that would need to be brought on board. So as an example, the North African countries. Niger has Algeria as a bordering state, and if the world isolates it and countries in the North Africa don't support that isolation, then we're likely to see an outlet for Niger, as it were. Of course, we've talked about Russia, we've talked about China. Those are also important players, especially given developments in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea. Already in some of the speeches issued by the junta, they've mentioned these three countries. And so, except if the world finds a way to bring on board these relevant players that I've mentioned, Turkey too is there. Turkey is also a key player in the region. The UAE is another key player in the region. So all of these relevant bodies, we've not seen their involvement so far. And so the regional body ECOWAS that has released the sanction must use diplomatic channels to engage with these various power players that I've mentioned and ensure that they are supportive of that policy. Nigeria, as the regional hegemon, is also a significant player. Power supply to Niger from Nigeria is significant, and already Nigeria has indicated it may interrupt that power. So these are all several ways. Of course, issues direct sanction on the members of the military junta and their family members, and then more importantly, to show that they will be held responsible for whatever happens, I think is the key to go about this. Unfortunately, using the antecedents of what happened in Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso, we haven't seen enough effort to hold to account the players that were involved in the coup. And I think this is what needs to be done so that there is direct responsibility for their action.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm afraid that's all we have time for at the moment. That's security analyst Kabir Adamu. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me.